morning. So, as I mentioned on my announcement, unfortunately I cannot be uh, at the OIT this Thursday or Friday due to some previous commitment that I had before I started teaching the course. But what is more important is that there are some topics that we actually need to cover before the end of the term, and I think project time management is one of those that is going to be really useful for you guys before assignment number 2. So the video that you guys are gonna see now explains in really thorough detail the main points that I will be interested in you guys conducting into project time management. Now, having said that, assignment number 2 is going to be focused on project scope management and project time management. Those two are chapters that you guys have on the textbook required for the course, but at the same time, on Monday, on Tuesday, that it will be the next time that we will see each other, I will go over the specifics of which software do I want you guys using for assignment number 2 and what are the key components that I want you guys doing for assignment number 2. Having said that, assignment number 2 will be posted on Tuesday, November 8th, and then as I mentioned earlier, the lecture of Tuesday, November 8th will cover how to complete assignment number 2. We haven't had a chance yet to look at assignment number 1. The TAs are working on it, but as you guys know, we did cover everything about quiz number 1. So if you guys have any questions about quiz number 1, about the marking of quiz number 1, please come to my office hours next week. Either Tuesday I'm going to be offering office hours from 8:30 to 2 p.m. or Thursday I'm going to be offering office hours from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. or Friday from 5:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. If you guys have any question about quiz number 1, you guys can come and I can try to explain you what we were actually looking for in quiz number 1. Regarding quiz number 2, we haven't taken a look at it yet. We're gonna try to finish first marking assignment number 1 so you guys have the feedback for assignment number 1 before you guys can start working on assignment number 2. So before any other administrative detail, and I'm not going to do any of the questions to consider because there's no interaction that I can show in here, so I'm just going to jump right away into the topic. And the topic for today's lecture is project time management. And I always start with trying to highlight the relevance of why do we do project time management. So throughout the course, I've been telling you guys that most of the projects fail in meeting the scope, time, and the cost projections. And there's different reasons why we can now, based on all the content that we have covered in the course, we can elude of why this is happening. But the main idea is that it's really hard in a project to be able to meet these three. When we talk about time management is one of the most crucial key performance indicators when we are working on a project. The reason why is because if we go a little over cost or if we go a little under cost, we can try to explain this by inflation or many other factors that might be affecting the different prices that we'll be seeing when we are actually executing the project. However, when you're thinking about time comparisons are usually made between the actual time taken to complete the project and the planned time. Time is something that is always going to happen. Time is going to pass and there's nothing that we can actually do in order to hold time. When people are trying to analyze time as a key performance indicator, what they are trying to do is what was the time that it actually take to complete the project and what was the time that actually you guys planned for the project. Since those two variables are so clear, sometimes it's really not fair to do these particular comparisons because people forget to include whatever the scope change that can happen throughout the project. So that's one of the main reasons of why doing this time management or project time management is so important. And I'm going to walk you guys through this presentation of why is this. Is project time management does not limit yourself to just do a proper planning of what the timing is going to be in a project, but it's more about the overall idea that I've been trying to talk you guys into, that is, you guys need to account for possible issues that you guys might run into your project and try to circumvent or prevent these particular issues by either estimating longer time than what you guys expected to, or adding in time buffers on different places within the methodology or the sequence that you guys are working with. Another really important thing to of why actually we do project time management are the cultural difference. And by cultural difference, uh, what I'm trying to get at is this idea that you guys are not always going to be working in the same environment, and especially Canada being such a multicultural place, you guys are going to end up working with people that have completely different methodologies of working. The different methodologies of working play an important role when you guys are thinking about project time management, because sometimes people actually like to work better during the day, sometimes people like to work better at night, sometimes people actually like to take a siesta in the middle of the day, and all these things are going to definitely play a really important role on what you guys are doing in terms of how you guys manage the time in your course. You guys might be also remembering that project time management was one of the questions that you guys had on quiz number 1. So here, this is the lecture that is going to explain you guys how this project time management gets actually implemented on a real project scenario. And the last one of doing project time management is that always what we are trying to elude is the idea of improving performance. So by detailing a project in a way that account for all the particular issues that can happen while performing the task, we are creating an understanding and a schedule that will always account for any particular issue that we might run while conducting the project, and therefore we will always be on top of the performance. So when we're talking about project time management, we have 6 particular activities that are really important. Plan schedule management, defining the activities, defining a sequence for those particular activities, estimating the activities resources, estimating the activities durations, and then the last one will be to develop a schedule or to evaluate what is happening. I'm going to go in detail through each of these particular sections so you guys can understand what I'll be looking at if I ask for some sort of time management on assignment number 2. So the first part is the schedule management plan, and the schedule management plan is created so you guys can account for changes that will happen in the project. If you guys remember, the very first week that I started talking about PMBOK, and more specifically about the knowledge areas of PMBOK, every single knowledge area of PMBOK was always including the change management plan or the schedule management plan or the cost management plan. And it was always this idea that things can happen or things can change within your project, and you guys need to account for that. So when we have the schedule management plan, there are a couple things that we actually pay attention to. The first one is the schedule model, and how are we creating our schedule? How are we defining the activities, the durations, and the dependencies that happen within our particular activities? And I'm going to explain you guys in more depth these particular concepts during this presentation. The second one is what is the tool or the methodologies that we are using to create this particular project schedule? What is the approach that we are taking? And we're also going to talk about those. The third one is how are we going to double check that what we are proposing in here will actually be implemented? What are the reviews? What are the updates? And who has the responsibility for those particular ones? And the last one is how the project changes will manage it, and how those project changes, more important, is how those project changes can actually be implemented into the time management, the project time management. This whole idea of being able to account for those changes is what makes the schedule management plan such a useful tool. So as a summary, all you guys are trying to account is for the changes that can happen within the system or within your project. And in order to do so, you guys need to really understand what is the schedule model that you guys are using, how you guys are creating the schedule, which approach you guys are taking, and how you guys are double checking the progress of creating that particular schedule for your project. That's what we mentioned, or that's what we referred to when we talked about a schedule management plan. Now, the second activity that we have in there is activity definition. And when we talk about activity definition, there's a couple things that I want to bring up in here. Activity definition always start with documentation that is always available to you guys. So in the last week, we were talking about a scope statement, and then how you guys can actually create a scope statement. And then from a scope statement, we did the whole process to getting into the work breakdown structure. But if you guys try to take a step back before the project scope statement, remember that everything started with the project charter. So the project charter is usually really useful because it gives us the start and an end date on a particular project. That's the first set of data that we have. Then we take that project charter, and based on the project charter, we are able to create the project scope management. And the project scope management, in order to create it, includes the idea of a work breakdown structure, and then trying to define all the possible work packages that are needed in order to complete your project. So when we're thinking about how do we do this activity definition, the first thing is that we refer to the scope baseline. The scope baseline itself is nothing different than the scope management or the scope statement plus the work breakdown structure plus the work breakdown dictionary. If you guys want to translate this into the other framework that we are using, it will be, again, your scope statement plus the project backlog plus the user stories. Based on this, you guys start trying to understand within those either work packages or user stories, what are the activities, what are the attributes, and what are the milestones that you guys or that will belong to each of those either work packages or user stories. When you guys are creating the list of the activities that are going to be needed, first thing that you guys do is to tabulate those particular activities. The way that you guys tabulate these particular activities is you guys need to actually give the activity a name, an identifying number, and a brief description that will allow anyone reading this particular document to understand what the activity is going to be about. The next step goes into the attributes. And then when we're talking about the attributes, activity lists and attributes has to be congruent with each other. Depending on what are the activities that you have, then you guys start thinking about what are the attributes for each of those particular activities. And in order to define where these attributes actually come from, you guys refer to the data that you guys already have. So either the work breakdown structure or the work breakdown structure dictionary, and in the other paradigm, the project backlog and the user stories. These documentations are the ones that are going to tell you what are the particular attributes for each of the activities that you guys have defined as needed to complete your project. When we're talking about milestones, there's a particularity about milestones in here. And every time that we think about milestones, those are significant events that happens within your project. But what makes it so unique is that there's no duration for those particular events. I'm not saying that there's no duration in order to get to the milestone, but once you guys have reached that milestone, that significant event, and you guys are trying to figure out how much that's going to take, the creation of the event on itself is the milestone. So when we're trying to figure out how much or how long it's going to take for that particular situation to happen, you guys have nothing to worry about because that's not going to take any particular time. Since it doesn't take any particular time, so we can start thinking as milestones, as flags that actually happen within your project that allow us to monitor the progress of what is happening within the project. Something important to say about the milestones is that not every deliverable or output in your project is a milestone. And please remember this, as many of the other things that I always say, you please remember this because this is going to be really a key point. And it's going to be something that I'm going to be asking you guys on quiz number 3. Not every deliverable nor every output that you guys have in your project is a milestone. Milestones usually refers to the most important and visible ones. Those are the ones that we actually call milestones. And I know all this seems like really conceptual, but on Tuesday when we go over how to create a Gantt chart and how to identify milestones or the sleep milestones within this particular Gantt chart, you guys are going to be able to conceptualize or materialize all these concepts into something more tangible. But in order to do so, you guys need to first understand these concepts, and then we can go into what is going to happen after. Something that I want to cover first is the type of activity relationships that you guys might encounter when you guys are working with project time management, or trying to define the time management of your project. So in terms of the activity relationships, there's four types of activity relationships that you guys can see. There's the finish to start relationship, start to finish relationship, start to start, and finish to finish relationship. These relationships, or these different type of relationships, what they allude to is this idea of what needs to happen first before something else happens. Again, this might seem a little abstract and a little conceptual, but it's really important to understand how is the relationship among the different tasks that you guys have identified. Remember that the first step was identifying the tasks that you guys actually had. And then after you guys identify the task or the activities, notice that I'm using those two terms interchangeably, then you guys need to be able to define or express or understand what are the relationships that happen between these two. So the first one, finish to start, means that the second activity will not start unless the first activity has been completed. The second case, the start to finish, means that the activity 2 or the second activity cannot finish until activity 1 has started. And I know all this seems like there's no cases like that that will happen within your project, but once you guys actually have conducted a thorough work breakdown structure, and you guys, or a thorough user story analysis, and you guys are trying to come up with the relationships among activity 1 and activity 2, or task 1 or task 2, you guys are going to realize that sometimes when you guys are trying to find the relationship or the dependencies among the different tasks, this is really important. The third case that we have in here is that activity 2 cannot start until activity 1 actually starts. And the last one is that second activity cannot finish until activity 1 finishes. Where do you guys are going to use this? Well, the main point in here is that you guys will end up using these particular relationships when you guys are talking about dependencies. And when you guys are going to create your Gantt chart, you guys are going to start by defining the activities, then by defining what are the attributes for those particular activities, and then based on that, you guys are going to start drawing relationships among the different activities that you guys are actually working with. In terms of the attributes that we were talking about, remember that I said lead versus lag. So the whole idea of lead versus lag is that it's a modification of an activity relationship. Lead means that there's the acceleration of the successor task, so we're just going to make faster whatever, or we're going to facilitate whatever new task is coming up based on what we're doing. And lag means that it needs to wait for whatever task we are conducting at that particular moment to complete it in order to just start the next one. What is the main difference? If you guys can notice, the main difference is actually where the arrow is actually landing. Now, it's not that you guys are going to have to precisely put the arrow in the particular time, but you guys are going to define the relationship among these tasks in the Microsoft project software that we're going to be using. And by clearly defining the relationship among this particular task, then the software itself will be in charge of placing the arrows in the proper way. Just so you guys have it in mind. Another of the activities that we have within the project time management is the sequencing the activities. So once we have defined the activities, and once we have defined the different attributes for those particular activities, then we move into how do we define the sequencing of these particular activities. And the main thing about sequencing is that it always relies on dependencies. And this is interesting because if you guys remember, dependencies is one of the main things that we cover when we are trying to talk about the project charter. So our project charter has its own internal list of dependencies, and then by doing so we can easily understand what is happening within the project. So in terms of dependencies, there are three types of dependencies that we actually acknowledge when we are conducting this definition of activity sequencing. The first one is a mandatory, and it's a hard logic. And an example for something like that will be that you guys cannot test the code until you guys have written the code. That's something mandatory, and it's hard logic. You guys cannot start testing something unless you guys have completed it. That's an example of what a mandatory dependency will be. When we're thinking about discretionary dependencies, we usually refer to it as soft or preferred logic. And the reason why it's preferred logic is because it's what a company with good practice would actually do. So if we say that we want to start the development until a detailed design has been completed, that's what a good company will do. But if instead you guys decide it's something discretionary and it's something that we will do because we prefer to do it that way, but instead there might be other companies that will prefer to start the development before the really thorough out design, detailed design has been completed. That's what we refer in terms of discretionary dependencies. We're talking about external dependencies. External dependencies are those that are not part of your project, are outside the scope of your project, but still will have an influence in your project. So if you're thinking about the installation of a new operating system, and the software depends on the delivery of a new hardware from an external supplier, something that you guys have no influence on it, even if the delivery of the new hardware might not be in your scope, that's a dependency that you guys actually need to account for within your project, and that's the external dependency. So we have the mandatory one, that is something that is logic and you guys cannot change. You get the discretionary one, that is something that you guys could decide whether or not you guys do it or not, and we have the external ones that again you guys cannot control but will definitely influence your project. The way that we analyze this particular sequencing process is by using something called the networking diagram. And this is what we feel or what we mean about the networking diagram. The networking diagram on itself is a narrow diagram that's supposed to identify what are the key activities that are happening within your project. When we're thinking about the arrow diagram or the narrow diagram, it's also called the diagram method or arrow diagramming method. And then only the activities that have dependencies are included in this particular method. So think about a normal project, whatever project you guys propose it on assignment number 1, right? Now, thinking about that project, think about all the different activities that you guys will identify for that particular project. After thinking about that, now think that only those ones that actually have some dependencies are the ones that you guys are going to identify here. The way that it works is usually goes from left to right if you guys are looking at your screen right now. And then each of the circles that you guys see in there are nodes. Those nodes, in reality, they don't have a particular value. They are just points of convergence for different particular tasks. And then as you guys can see, from each node there's some arrows where the head of the arrow is pointing somewhere. The data that is on top of those arrows is the one that is telling you how long each of those particular tasks or activities is going to take. So we have in A1 and A2 and A3. A1 equal 2 means that activity on itself is going to take 2 days, and then in order for activity 2 to happen, activity 1 needs to be completed, and then activity 2 can happen and it's going to take another 3 days. Then after that, activity 3 can happen and it's going to take another 2 days. However, in order to get to the end, there's the other side of the coin in which activity 4, activity 5, and activity 6 needs to be completed before you can actually finish the project or run into something that you guys will do about the project. There's another method for doing the network diagram, and it's called the precedence diagramming method. Now, you guys know that I always show you the different tools, and then I start asking you guys to try to rationalize why are you guys going to use one tool over the other one. So if we are talking about the precedence diagram method over the previous one, the arrow diagram method, in this one, all you guys are doing is using nodes to understand what are the relationships that happen between the different tasks and how multiple tasks are probably going to be needed in order to get to a particular node. That is what is happening on the end case in this particular slide. Now, when we look at the network diagram, but in terms of the arrow diagram method, we think about the precedence diagramming method, then what we see here is that now the arrows don't have the activities on its own. Now the boxes on itself are the activities that we need to complete in order to get to the particular outcome. And that's one of the main differences that we have in here. Instead of having everything written on the arrows, where we're going to have everything written is within the box. This allows us to actually bring more information in here, and I'm going to show you guys how from here we're going to develop into something larger and with more information, and how that particular information is actually going to help us in the long run. But the main idea of what we have in here is that by doing this kind of network diagramming is going to allow us to identify something that is really important on this time management analysis, and is the critical path for a particular method. It's really important that you guys understand these different methods of diagramming, what are the sequence of different tasks, because by understanding those sequences, then you guys will be able to do the analysis to identify what the critical paths are. After covering the different methods that we have to identifying the sequencing on a problem, I'm going to jump into how do we estimate resources. So when we're doing the estimation of resources, the main point that you guys need to start asking yourself is, do we have any historical data? Do we have any record anywhere that tell us how many people do we need to complete this? Do we have the resources that are required for this particular skill? Do we need to outsource some of the work? For those ones that are in GDW or in the IT workshop, I know you guys don't have historical data, but you guys can ask yourself, do we have the resources with the required skill at this point? Is there anything that you guys are trying to do or trying to accomplish that you guys might feel at this point that you guys don't have the required skills? Do you guys need help from other people, maybe from other years or something like that? Those are questions that are initial questions to the estimate of resources process that we have in here. Now, when we're talking about resources, I'm not only talking about the equipment or the material, but also about the human personnel that you guys are going to involve on developing those particular resources. Usually when we're talking about resources, there's something called the resource breakdown structure. And if you guys remember at the very beginning of the course, when we were talking about the importance of aligning the company goals with the projects that the company was getting, the resources breakdown structure is one of those key performance indicators that will tell us whether the company that was developing a new product was going to be successful or not. So here is where these where these resources or breakdown of resources will actually get implemented. When we think about what the next step will be is, once we have all the resources, then our next step will be, how do we estimate the duration of the resources? We estimate the duration of the resources. You guys can see that there's going to be a synergy between these 2 points, the resources and the time that it's going to take. If we put more resources to complete a particular task, we know that intrinsically the task itself is going to be completed faster. However, there's another side of the coin, and is how much money you guys are devoting into those particular resources. So if you guys are going to devote more money into a particular resource, because that's going to reduce the time that you guys are doing, and then there's a trade-off that you guys need to analyze. And there's going to be some tools that I'm going to present today that will allow you guys to analyze what those particular trade-offs should be, and to which point you guys actually can get that particular method. In terms of activity duration, or estimating the activity duration, there's something really important that I want to clarify in here, and is the difference between effort and duration. What people think every time that they go into estimate what the activity duration is, they usually confuse the duration of the activity with the effort that is going to take you to complete the activity. So let's think about a particular example, and I know I'm moving myself a little. I'm going ahead for myself, going into some parametric estimating. But the main idea in here is that people used to, when I refer to effort, is the time that it's going to take someone to complete something. That's the effort. So let's say that if I'm teaching you guys an hour and a half session, the effort for me will be, well, it will take me an hour and a half because that's what I'm teaching. However, when you think about duration, I need to combine the time that it's going to take me to teach the class plus the time that it's going to take me to prepare this particular lecture. That's going to be the duration of the task itself, that it will be to deliver an hour and a half session on project management. Though the combination of those two, the time that it has been worked plus the lapse time, is what makes the duration. It's not only the effort, and that's something that I cannot stress anymore because it's really important for what you guys are going to be doing in assignment number 2. For long projects, and if any of you guys actually proposed a rather longer timeline in the projects that you guys did on assignment number 1, then for those long projects, instead of having duration on work packages, we do it estimated in phases. So we estimate a particular phase, and then within that particular phase, we go down to the particular task or the particular activities, and then we estimate the time that it's going to take us on those phases. So the methods that we have to do this, one is analogous, the other one is parametric, and the third one is the 3-point estimating form. When we're thinking about parametric, and this is where I said that I was getting ahead of myself before. So parametric is either you guys base on historical data or project characteristics. So if you guys have been working in, I'm gonna make an example that is really IT related. So if you guys have been coding for the same particular department for a couple years, you guys have historical data of how much it's supposed to take you guys to complete a particular task, whatever the task might be, right? Now, if we think about the project characteristics and we put that on alliance with the historical data, then you guys get a better representation of what you guys actually will be, or how much effort you guys will be putting in there. And remember that it's not the effort, but it's the time worked plus the lapse time that you guys are looking at. That's the main point that you guys are actually looking at. So let's think about this. If we think about duration, if the work quantity that we have is 200 images, and then the production rate that we have is 4 images, then we know that 4 images per hour, then we know that we'll probably complete that work on 50 hours. Those 50 hours are going to be what? Well, those 50 hours are going to be the time work in order to complete that particular task. But then when we're talking about the duration, you guys are going to have to add the lapse time, because if you guys think about it, 50 hours, that means that it's going to be depending on how many hours you guys are working a day. If you guys are working 8 hours, then that's going to be a certain number of days. If you guys are working less hours, then that's going to be probably more days. Of course, if you guys are working less hours, and there's less resources that you guys need to invest. But then when we're talking about the estimation of how long something is going to take, we're not talking about the hours, but we're talking about the work days. How many days of work is going to take me to complete this particular task? And then how do I work around those particular estimates? The second one, the reverse analysis, is either a contingency reserve or a management reserve. So on the reserve analysis, we address the known unknowns, and that means is that what do we know about this particular task and what do we know about this particular task. We start with what we know and we develop an estimate based on what we know, and then we account for what we don't know. On the other side, we start with what don't we know, and then based on this uncertainty of what we don't know, how can we estimate for that elapsed time of something that we don't know. That will be the management reverse. The third version that I showed you guys was the 3-point estimating. And the 3-point estimating will be something that I will touch base on again at the end of the presentation. But the main idea here is that you guys will use PERT, the Program Evaluation and Review Technique, for time management, project time management endeavors. The main idea here is that you guys are going to have 3 different measures for a particular estimate. The most likely estimate, that will be based on the parametric data that you guys have, based on documentation or historical data that you guys might have access to. The optimistic estimation, that is, if you guys were the most optimal people in the world, how fast do you guys think that something can be completed? Here I don't mean to have unrealistic expectations about something, right? If you guys frame yourself in a realistic context, how long do you guys think, or how fast do you guys think can complete a particular task? But then at the same time, you guys bring the pessimistic perspective and you guys try to weigh them all together. So as you guys can see on the formula that is in the very bottom, what you guys have is that the optimistic time plus 4 times the most likely time plus the pessimistic time, and if you divide that all within 6, then that will give you a weighted average of what the estimation for that activity should be. And again, this is used when we have a high level of uncertainty. So what we were talking about, the unknown on the previous slide, this is something that we will use, the 3-point estimating. But then, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is something that we will also use for program evaluation at the very end of this whole process. When we have go through estimating the activities, so far we have covered identifying the activities. Then once we have defined the activities, we go into sequencing the activities, and in order to do so, we need to identify the different type of dependencies and then the different type of network diagrams that we can use in order to complete this particular sequencing. Then after that, we go into estimating the activity resources, and you guys just need to understand what kind of resources you guys have access to and when are those resources going to be available. But then after you guys have understood all these different points, then you guys go into estimating the activity duration, and those are the different methodologies that you guys have in order to estimate how much each particular activity that you guys have defined is going to take. Now the next step will be to actually developing the project schedule, and this is the most crucial part of the project time management. Developing the project schedule, as I said at the very beginning, one of the main issues with time management or with time itself is that people is going to compare you from how long did it actually take you to complete a particular task. Again, how long did you say that it was going to take you to complete that particular task? Developing the project itself allows you to account for how long it's going to take me to complete the project, but also by analyzing all the different routes or sequences that you guys will have, you guys will use something or some tools called the critical path method and the critical chain method in order to figure out if there's some room for optimization in what you guys are proposing within your particular project. Now, developing the project schedule doesn't mean that it's the final version and it can never be changed. It can always be changed through a change control process, and that's why it was so important at the very beginning of this presentation to talk about the mechanisms that we will implement in order to account for the changes that can happen within a particular system. So let me walk you through the 2 different ways that you guys can create this particular project schedule. So once you guys have the estimates of how long everything is going to take and you guys have the sequencing, that's going to create something really similar to this, a critical path analysis. In this case, as you guys can see, the type of network diagram that I'm using is the precedence diagramming method. And the reason why I'm using the preceding diagramming method is because all I'm trying to do in here is to present more information than what you guys have. So in each box, if we focus on each box, we're going to have different information. The first information is the activity, so whatever number of the activity is. The number that follows the A or the letter that you guys are seeing in there is the duration. The number underneath the letter and the number is going to be the float. By float, what I mean is the number of days that that particular task can actually be offset. So I can either start 6 days earlier, or I can actually take 6 more days. That's the float. Is how much room do you guys have for change or modifications within each of those particular tasks. Based on that float, what you guys can see is that, let's focus on A7. If we focus on A7, there's no early start for that particular activity. and there's no early finish for that particular activity. If you start on 0, then you're going to take 7 days, therefore you finish on 7. But then if there's a later start, and the later start is given by the float, which means that the float was 6, so that means that maybe 6 days after I can start the same activity. What that means is that after starting on day 6, plus the 7 days that it's going to take you to the activity, the late finish for that particular critical path analysis, that particular activity, is going to take you 13 days. That's how I want you guys reading this type of diagrams. You guys are going to look at each of the boxes. You guys are going to look at what are the activity for each of the boxes, and then once you guys have defined the activity from each of the boxes, you're going to look at the duration for each activity. After that, you guys are going to look outside the box, and by looking outside the box, you guys are going to start identifying 4 main, well, within the box you guys also have the flow that is going to tell you how much the estimations can change within your project. Now, once you guys have done that, I want you guys looking outside the boxes and understanding how the float is playing a room, or playing a game, playing a role within this whole identification or creation of the project schedule. So when we're talking about the critical path analysis, the way that we define a critical path analysis is by identifying the path that takes the longest time to be completed. What I mean by that is that if you guys look at the path that is actually highlighted in red, the first activity is C, that is going to take 8 days. The next activity will be F. And F in this particular point is actually taking 6 days. The next activity after that is J, that is taking 3, and K is taking 4. If you guys add all those, you guys have 8 plus 6, that is going to be 14, plus 3, that is going to be 17, plus 4, that is going to be sorry, I lost the count, so let's start again. 8 plus 6, that is going to be 14, plus 3, that is going to be 17, plus 4, that is going to be 21, right? That's going to be what you guys are looking at if you guys choose that particular path. If you choose the path above, not the one underneath, the path above, so we start with activity A, that will be 7 days on activity A, 2 days on activity B, so that will give us 9 days so far. And then we go into activity H, that will be another 2 days, that will be 11 total, plus 4, that will be 15. So that number is not the longest path that you guys can find. When you guys look in the bottom one, you guys have 3, 4, 4, 3, and 4 at the end. That still only give you 12, 15, 18. So clearly the one that I showed you guys, 8 days, 6 days, 3 days, and 4 days, that's the longest path. When we're thinking about the critical path analysis, we are choosing to go for the longest path that you guys have in there, because that's the shortest or the fastest that you guys can complete this particular project. The fastest you guys can complete a project is determined by how long a particular sequence, your longest sequence, is going to take. That's how we identify what the critical path is. And by identifying that critical path, then we know what is the fastest that we can complete this particular project. I want to clarify this because this is really important, and this is something that I've seen many students actually having issues and identifying it incorrectly when we go to the exam. So when we're thinking about the critical path analysis, we are aiming to identify the longest path, because by identifying the longest path, it will give you guys the opportunity to understand that that longest path is going to be the fastest way that you guys can actually complete that particular project. That's what the critical path analysis gives us. So when you guys are using a given software, or you guys are going to do it by yourself, all you guys need to understand is that, well, based on that particular critical path, I know how fast I can actually complete my project. The float and the early start and the later start, those are parameters that are given to you guys, so you guys can understand that based on those given parameters, what is the room for change that you guys have within each task. That's the main point that you guys have in there. That's what we do in terms of critical path analysis. Now, the second method that I wanted to explain to you guys about how to analyze project management schedule is the critical chain method. As you guys see, the example is really similar. All we are doing in here is we are adding B's. What I mean by B is what we are adding buffer, and depending where the B is located is a different type of buffer that we are adding in here. As you guys look at the numbers are exactly the same that we had in the previous example. The premise or the underpinning mechanism for the critical chain method is that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. What that means is that which one will be the weakest link on this whole analysis? Just think about it for a second. The weakest link in a design like this, if this was the design of our particular project, the weakest link is the one that actually takes the longest. That's going to be our weakest link in here. So if we are thinking about the one that takes the longer is going to be the weakest link, all we need to do is to make sure or guarantee that all the resources that we need for that particular path are there on time. That's what we're trying to do. What is the reason why we do all this? Well, there's many different theorems or ideas that you guys can run into. One is that people love to multitask, and then not most, but like some of the project management initiatives sometimes is to just get the same person or the same resource to actually work on assignment A, B, and C at the same time. The problem doing something like that, the problem of working on 3 different assignments at the same time is that although we might believe that it will actually improve productivity and actually get the 3 assignments completed faster, sometimes it can backfire us. And when it backfires us, we ended up spending more time than what we would have spent if we just focused on one task at a time. Having said that, that's one of the reasons why we care about this particular path analysis, because sometimes resources are just being overutilized. The second one is what we called the Murphy's Law. So Murphy's Law or the Parkinson's Law. Parkinson's Law is really similar to what you guys do. You guys as students, and I noticed it on assignment number 1, it didn't matter how much time I gave you guys for assignment number 1. Most of you guys were completing assignment number 1 the day before or the day of the deadline of assignment number 1. That's what the Parkinson's Law says. Parkinson's Law says that a given worker is going to take as many days as you give him or her to complete a particular task. So let's say that you guys have 2 weeks to complete assignment number 2. If I give you 2 weeks, you guys will complete it in 2 weeks. If I give you 3 weeks, you guys will complete it in 3 weeks. And not to say that the quality of the assignment is going to change much because I'm giving you an extra week. You guys says, or what the law implies is that we just take as much time as we are given in order to complete a task. Now, David, is there a case in which people can just give you shorter time? Yeah, that's completely understandable, but that's not really what the Parkinson's Law is alluding to. The Parkinson's Law is alluding to the idea that the more time that you get, you are sure that you're going to spend all that time in completing a particular task. Having said that, and we're thinking about the critical path analysis in here, we need to make sure that although the Parkinson's Law exists and people is just going to take as much time as we give them to complete a particular task, the resources that are needed to fulfill that particular critical path need to be there in order to do so. Something that I probably forgot to mention earlier is the idea of like what happens if we have 2 different critical paths. By saying that, what I mean is that if we have different paths in our project, and then the different paths in our project actually add to the same number. So if if we had the same 21 coming from two different paths, then those two are going to become our critical paths. Those two are going to be the ones that we're going to analyze the same way, and then if we are going to the critical chain method, are the ones that we're going to try to fit with resources as much as we can. Now let me talk a little bit about the buffer itself and what are we doing in terms of the buffer. So when we're talking about the buffer, as you guys can see, the buffers are happening on or after activities. It's called pre-feeding buffer or feeding buffers. And then these feeding buffers, as you guys can see it on the connection between, let me show you. Let's focus on J3. As you guys look at J3, there's a first buffer that is between G4, that is a normal task, and J3. This buffer is given in there, so now instead of me saying that J3 is going to start on this particular date, I put a buffer before that. That's what is called the feeding buffer. So I will say that I need J3 to start in an earlier date, but in reality I don't need J3 to start in that earlier date. The moment that I get into that earlier date and it's not met by the person that was completely G4, then I still have a buffer, a feeding buffer that I put in there of couple days, I guess, of time that even if the person that is completely G4 is taking longer, it's not going to affect directly what J3 is going to take. Now, why don't you want to affect J3? Well, the main point is that since the critical path analysis is the fastest way that you guys can complete the project, which is sort of abstract if you think about, although it's the fastest way, is the path that actually takes the longest. If G4 starts interpeting into completing J3, then J3 is going to take longer. And the moment that J3 actually takes longer, that means that the whole project is going to take longer to be completed. That's why you guys also see a feeding buffer between H2 and K4. Why H2 and K4? Well, if you guys analyze that, H2 and K4 are needed in order to complete the finish. So since I know that those are resources that are needed to complete K4, then I need to put a feeding buffer. Every place where you guys see that are resources that are going to directly or indirectly influence the critical path analysis that you guys have done, you guys need to add a buffer before the completion of that particular task. And the last buffer is the after the fact, or is the end buffer, the project buffer. What the project buffer means is that we're gonna assume that K4 day 21st or day 21 is gonna be our end date, and then we're gonna say that that's gonna be November 4th or November 3rd, depending on which day or which season you guys are in. Having said that that's your end date, that project buffer is going to give you a couple days after that, just in case the project is taking longer, just in case the critical path analysis or the task within the critical path analysis have actually taken longer. Then what you guys are going to have is that instead of you guys say that it's going to complete in 21 days, you guys are going to say that it's going to complete in 26 days. So those 5 days, the extra buffer that you guys are adding to your project, are going to probably help you in the moment that you guys are running into some time constraints based on, I don't know, a resource dependency that you guys didn't account for, or something that you guys couldn't foresee, but then it's happening in your project, and then you guys are just going to take longer. This critical chain method, or why it's so important to understand the critical chain method, is because it builds up on the idea of the critical path analysis, but it accounts for this intrinsic complexity that we have when we are developing our project. So this whole idea of, well, we plan the project a particular way and the project is just going to end that particular way, barely ever happens. So what is important about project management, and especially time management, and this is going to probably sound or show you guys why the responses that I read on the quiz number 1 were so off, is because the moment that you guys think about time management, and I know that you guys think that this whole course might be simply common sense. Time management doesn't mean that, oh, I'm just going to manage the time properly. Time management means I'm going to understand what are the activities that I'm going to need to complete. I'm going to understand what are the relationships among those activities so I can actually create the sequencing for those. Then I'm going to understand what kind of resources do I have? Do I have it available? Do I have the resources that I require for this? But then using all that information, then I'm going to create something that is going to be my critical path analysis of how do I complete the project. And more important than that, okay, once I've completed this, I need to account for the things that I know it will happen as my project develops, as the project unfolds, but it's hard to account, it's hard to identify them before the fact. And the way that you guys do that is by adding those buffers. And what the critical chain method is giving you is the opportunity of adding those buffers on the places when you guys are going to need it the most. That's the main idea, or that's the main rationale behind the critical chain method. Now, when we think about, well, David, so we have created all these different network diagrams, and then based on the network diagrams, we did the critical path analysis or the critical chain method, and then we know that now we're accounting for the unexpected on the development of our project, and that's great. But what about if we use that same idea to reduce the project duration? So when we think about reduce the project duration, I know you guys might be thinking about a couple ideas of how you guys can reduce that. One of the ones that we have is either crashing or fast tracking. So what do I mean by crashing? What do I mean by crashing is that I'm going to reduce the duration of the activities on the critical path. Think about how could I reduce activities on a critical path, or the duration of the activities on a critical path. Just give it 10 seconds of thought. One of the ways that you guys will reduce the activities on a critical path is by adding more resources to that particular path. So remember at the very, not at the very beginning, but remember during this lecture, I told you guys about the trade-off. You guys can put more resources, which will actually increase the cost. You guys must consider what is the quality that's going to be, the cost that is going to increase, and other factors. But once you guys put it in, yes, you guys are probably going to reduce the activity of the critical path. So the idea behind that is, let's say that you guys have a company. And then within your company, there's someone that is working part-time that is in charge of doing a particular task, and then due to the part-time, that person said, well, it's going to take me 2 weeks. Then what you guys kind of start thinking is that, well, that's 2 weeks of work. What if I hire this person full-time? It's probably going to be the same amount of money that I was already spending in this, but then what I'm going to get out of that is that my project is going to finish a week earlier. That's the trade-off analysis that you guys do, and that's what crashing actually alludes to. It's this idea of like, just you guys can reduce the duration of the activities, but by reducing the duration, you guys must consider if you guys are affecting the quality of your project, the cost of your project, or any other factors in your project. Now, the other possibility of reducing the project duration is fast tracking. And by fast tracking, what that's supposed to mean is that things are usually working parallel. I don't know how familiar you guys are with the idea of pipeline, but I'm pretty sure I've mentioned it a couple times along the course. Pipeline means that you can execute couple tasks at the same time, and because the tasks are not directly related with each other, you guys will actually reduce completion time significantly. Now in here, when you guys are defining a critical path, because that's what we're working with, and you decide to start executing things in parallel, there's always the risk. There's always the risk that what happens if now that I'm doing everything in parallel, one thing finishes before the other one, and then things get messy, and then things get screwed. It has to be a really experienced project manager, or a person that actually understands the project a lot, that can say, well, if we execute these activities in parallel, we can probably reduce the project duration without introducing mass risk. But in most of the cases, fast tracking will definitely introduce the risk, and crashing, in terms of project duration reduction, it will always increase the cost. Now, in order to summarize and in order to conclude all this, there's the same tool that I showed you guys halfway through the presentation. Is the project evaluation and review technique. How do we figure it out if what we have done is actually good or not? Well, what people are gonna do is, like, to whatever total time that you guys have, that's gonna be your most likely time, because you guys have done the whole critical path analysis, you guys have done the critical chain method, you guys have added all the buffers that you guys needed, and you guys have a most likely time to happen. After that, you guys are gonna analyze, well, now what if we go optimistic about this? What will be the fastest way that we can do it? And then what if we go pessimistic about this? What is the worst case scenario we have done? You guys add all those values, you guys divide it by 6, and that will give you the weighted average. The evaluation of this will be compared usually to the weighted average, not to the most likely time that you guys gave, not to the optimistic, not to the pessimistic, to the weighted average. If you guys complete your project on the weighted average time, then people will be okay. If you guys are over the weighted average time, then there might be issues that people would like to talk to you guys about after the fact, or if you guys finish it before the time, no one has an issue. No one have ever had an issue with finishing before you guys actually needed to finish. So guys, this is everything that I had for today. I apologize for not being able to be there presenting all this information, but if there's any question that you guys might have about this particular video, please email my personal account and I will try to get back at you guys as soon as possible. At the same time, please, if you guys have any question about quiz number 1, just come to see me on my office hours, and then we can work those doubts out. We're going to try to finish the marking of assignment number 1 as soon as possible, so you guys have the feedback ready for assignment number 2. And then on Tuesday I'm going to see you guys and we're going to go over what I'm actually expecting for assignment number 2, what is the software that I'm expecting you guys to use, and how the combination between the scope management and time management will compose the factors that I want from assignment number 2 from you guys. I hope this video was clear enough for you guys to understand, and have a good weekend.